This is my slideshow. It's called Accessibility for Beginners, or How I Want to Destroy Video. No, that's not what it's about. So is this the clicker? I guess it is. If I push this button, does it change? No. Does it? Is it this button? It's that button. Okay, so a little bit about me. I was born with autosomal congenital cataracts, which is a cataract that develops in the eye in the womb. It's a genetic mutation that has been in my family for hundreds of years. So I have a lot of blind relatives as well. I was born in the US. I moved to Finland in 2011, and I've been working for Nopea, which is an animation and mobile game studio since 2015. Yay, that's my boss. He's really excited about Nopea. Anyway, at Nopea, I started out just doing kind of sales and marketing and some general office work, and over time I've gone on to be a producer, a voice actress, a writer, and so on. In my spare time, I'm also a Eurodance artist, and I'm a huge fan, especially of Estonian dance music, so being in Tallinn is really exciting. And actually, I'm such a nerd that I have hundreds of Estonian Eurodance and dance music CDs. When I came here last summer, Postimees actually had a photographer follow me around for the entire weekend that I was here. And the whole gist of the story was, look, she's blind and American and knows about Estonia. So I'm super great to be here. And lately at Nopea, along with my accessibility talks, we're developing a narrative-based mobile game called Lads with Feelings that's all about reuniting a fictional 90s boy band and involves you being able to play with real-life boy band members. It's the perfect game for me. So this is a really serious topic. And because of that, I think it's really important to start with a little bit of humor. So I've included for you guys some fun slides just to kind of get the humor out now. So take in the fun slides before I go forward. And because I'm blind, I actually can't read from that nice little floor monitor, so I have to follow along with my notes from my phone. This would be really unprofessional for anyone but me. So I'm going to go forward now. So what is accessibility exactly? You're always going to get a different answer to this question depending on who you ask. If you ask a 15-year-old on Twitter, it's a plot by feminists to destroy video games. If you ask a grown-up, accessibility is the idea that games should be able to be played by anyone regardless of situation. The idea that things like low vision or being hard of hearing or maybe mental difficulties shouldn't play a role in whether or not a person can be a gamer or enjoy a game, and the idea that because games are now as much of a part of pop culture as movies, films, music, and so on, we should treat them as such. When is the last time any of you ever heard someone say, "I hate movie subtitles because they ruin movies for the rest of us"? I'm gonna guess never. But that is something that disabled gamers and people who advocate for accessibility hear about accessibility features in games pretty regularly, which is quite shocking. So, who benefits from accessibility? It's not exactly always as clear as you think. People think that, okay, if you put subtitles in, they're going to benefit deaf people. That's true. They're also going to benefit people who are temporarily in situations where they can't hear things. So how many of you have are parents or have small children living in your house? You can raise your hands. I can't see that, but if it makes you feel good, raise your hand. When you have a small child, they sleep a lot. And when they finally get to sleep, you don't want to wake them up. But you might still want to play a game. There might be a game that you only get to play when the kid's asleep. So you play the game with subtitles so that you don't wake up the ticking time bomb in the next room. Or if you're chubby like me, maybe you like to eat a lot. And you eat so loudly sometimes that you can't hear the game. Don't be ashamed. It happens to the best of us. You're not deaf or disabled, but you need the subtitles in that moment because in that moment things aren't so good. Similarly, you could be playing a game a very sunny bench or sitting on a bus going somewhere and the sun is shining right in your face and you still want to be able to play your game on your phone or on your Switch or whatever. And in those situations, accessibility features that are designed for the visually impaired are going to help you. Another demographic of people who benefit from accessibility features, which is not talked about enough, are older people. Now, again, you can raise your hands if you want, but this is a rhetorical question. How many of you plan on totally giving up on playing video games when you turn 65? How many of you are going to turn 65 and say, well, that was fun, now it's time to start knitting and yelling at children on my lawn and, you know, doing all the other things that old people do, no more video games? I'm going to guess no one. And in the time that I've been asking this question and that my colleague Ian Hamilton has been asking this question at events, only one person has ever said yes. Out of hundreds and hundreds of people, only one person has ever said, actually, yes, when I turn 65, I'm going to stop playing and I'm going to have fun watching my great-grandkids or my grandkids play, and that's going to be it. And that's fine. However, the majority of people aren't. And I ask this question, and I bring up the number 65, or the age 65, because that is when you are technically, on paper, old. Sorry to anyone here who might be 65 or older. And at that point, you are so much more likely to have some kind of health problems or challenges that you don't have when you're young. Like it or not, we all get old. You can say, I'm not going to get old because I'm going to die by then, but that's a really grim way of looking at it. Hopefully, everyone in this room will at some point be old. And we need to be prepared for that. We need to be prepared that when our generation ages, our generation is probably going to need to do things a little bit differently than the way we do them now when we're youngish. I don't want to say I'm young anymore because I'm not. And I have to check my notes here really quick. Sorry about that. This is one of those things where when you're able, you can just kind of look over there or look down there, but it's a little less embarrassing for me to do this than it is to bend over there. So one moment while I check my notes about who is benefited. Yes, so I mentioned people in bad lighting, and then also another thing to remember is people on the autism spectrum. This is a bit anecdotal, but my cousin, who I spent a lot of time with growing up, because he's only a couple years younger than me, is severely autistic. He cannot lose, and no amount of therapy or courses or anything is going to help him learn how to lose. It is just how his brain is. And there are millions of people like him on the autism spectrum, maybe not as severe, but because it's a spectrum. So some people just feel really bad when they lose, but some people can't lose. And in the case of my cousin, if he loses, he gets violent. He breaks things, and it's quite bad. And things like easy mode, which I can't believe I have to even say, but because of the Twitter debate last week, I feel like I need to bring it up. Things like easy mode are not meant to make games worse for the rest of you. They're meant to make lives manageable for not just the people with the disability or the impairment, but for the people around them. It's not easy being in a situation where you're in charge of taking care of someone who has that kind of violent reaction to loss or to defeat. And I think that people like him deserve to have the experience of playing a game. And if there isn't an easy mode, just having a mode, for example, where you can turn off taunts, for example. So if you do lose, you lose, but no one taunts you for it. Things like that are also accessibility features because they just help make things a bit more streamlined. Difficulty is relevant, and I'm going to touch this later in my next slide, but I am going to move forward. So these are some myths about accessibility. The first myth is that it's expensive and it's going to hurt small studios' budgets. And I want you guys to look at it like this. You have lots of money. It would be nice, right? You have lots of money, and you are going to build a house. And you build the house, and at the very last stage of the house is almost ready. You decide that actually your bedroom should have X, Y, and Z. And you go to your building company and you say, okay, my bedroom needs to have X, Y, and Z. And your building company says, oh, geez, the bedroom is almost ready. The house is almost done. And now you're telling me you need this. That's going to be really expensive because we've already built the house. And then you're angry and you might not get the thing you want, and then your kids are mad because you might have said, yeah, we're going to have this, and then you can't give it to them, and they're like, Mom, what the heck, and it's bad. Or if you're going to build a house and you look at it and you say, okay, I want to have everything, and you take a little bit of extra time when you're doing the blueprints of the house, and you say, you know what, actually, what if we do X, Y, and Z here? And you go to your builder and you say, okay, how does this work? And the builder says, well, now that you say it in this stage, it's actually quite easy to implement. We'll just build this wall slightly different, and then that will easily accommodate this, that, and that. The same principle applies to games. If you have a product that's almost already ready, and at the very end you say, actually, I want accessibility features, it might be doable, but it might not be. Especially if you just vaguely say to your programming team, okay, now we want accessibility. And they're all scratching their heads like, well, geez, I don't know what that means. I don't even know where to begin. They might find one article or one estimate about one feature and then go to the team lead and say, wow, this is impossible. And then, yeah, it's going to be impossible because your product is already finished. But if you sit down at the very beginning and you think about, what kind of game am I going to make? What is this project actually? And in the very beginning, you say, okay, this game is going to be this and this and this in this style. You can, at that point, research accessibility for games like that. And I'm going to touch that on my next, in my next slide. But it's not expensive if you plan. If you plan badly, it can be expensive, and then it's sad, and then your players are sad. My game is too small or too simple. Maybe if you plan on making your game for yourself and maybe your friends and never publishing it, never releasing it, it's just a fun thing that some of your friends come and play, then I can say that, yeah, maybe your game is too small for accessibility features. But in my opinion, as a blind gamer, any game that plans on being, or that you plan on having on an app store or a platform or plan on showing to the world should have some level of accessibility features because you never know what's going to take off and what doesn't. It's pretty unlikely that something you just throw out there with no marketing, for example, will take off, but you never know. Look at things like Flappy Bird. Weird things happen sometimes. And if you plan on sharing your craft and your creation with the world, you want as many people to be able to play it as possible. I remember at PGC Helsinki last year, there were these really nice group of guys next to us who had a really interesting looking game that I couldn't play. And I sat down and I was all ready to play, and then I was like, yes, do you have any accessibility features? And the guy was just like flabbergasted. He was like, oh my God, I've never thought of that before. I'm so sorry. And the next 10 minutes were him basically just repeating, I'm so sorry, as if it was the mortal sin to present me with a game that I couldn't play. And I said to him, like, do you plan on releasing this? And he said, yeah, we do. And I was like, well, you know, maybe kind of take this lesson and move forward, and maybe the next iteration or the next time around you can kind of implement something. But a lot of it, the time, people just don't realize it. And they start developing something thinking it's going to be for fun. I'm talking about indie studios and small people here. They make a passion project that grows and grows and grows, and then they get so proud of it and they're going to release it, and then there's nothing. So always consider it, even if you don't think you're going to kind of share it with the world. It's for a niche group. That is another myth, as I said before. Features that are designed to help a niche group can actually be helpful for the whole audience. I forgot to put this statistic in my slides, so I'm going to mess it up. But my colleague Ian Hamilton has a really good point about, I think it was subtitles in, please yell out if anyone knows what I'm about to say. I think it was subtitles in Assassin's Creed. Ended up being used by something like 67% of all players, and those are an accessibility feature designed for a supposedly niche market that were then embraced by a larger community. So you actually never know, you never know what's going to take off and what's actually going to be useful for everyone. It's going to ruin video games, / this is just a conspiracy by people who are bad at games, you should be good at games, it's your own fault if you're bad. I must have been sleeping for the past, like, 15 years, and to an extent I have been. I'm in my own little Eurodance bubble where I just listen to Coder and everything is fine. But I remember as a child playing all kinds of different games on PC, on Nintendo, and then on N64, on PlayStation, and so on. And then really kind of like Disney Windows games, everything you can imagine, really. I gamed a lot. I remember that a lot of different games had options for, difficulties and turning things on and off, and there was no debate back then. And now it feels like there's a certain subset of not devs, but gamers who feel that if games aren't hard, and if games aren't so hard that the average person can't play them, then they're not real games. And I don't really know where that comes from. As a kind of more casual to intermediate person, I don't understand where that comes from. Not every game needs to be so difficult that the average person is too intimidated to even try it. I don't think that accessibility features ruin games. I think that games are now such a big part of our everyday lives that if a child today growing up can't play Fortnite, for example, they're totally isolated. There was a guy, actually just a little bit ago, who gave a really great lecture about the social impact of Fortnite and how it brings young people together because of their ability to share memes and share dances and so on. Imagine being a kid who can't play Fortnite now. You are so isolated from everything simply because it's unplayable for you. And I don't think that's fair to anyone. Similarly, as an adult, if all of my coworkers and all of my game industry colleagues are playing a game that I can't play, I can sit nicely at the table and listen to the conversation, but I can't join in. And then I kind of have to sit there and hope that maybe the conversation changes and I can jump in. And this is a very personal anecdote, but this is what disabled gamers feel. This is how we manage. This is how we cope. When there's a game that we can't play, we're just isolated. And that isolation is already something that we deal with as disabled people in a society that oftentimes forgets or neglects to take us into consideration. So I hope that stays with you. So the next question is, how? First things first, you have to kind of really decide, planning at the very beginning and the early development phase, what you're going to do and if you're going to do anything at all. Because as I said before, the later into the project, the more of the house that's already been built, the harder it is to add in extra stuff. You need to think about it from the very beginning, what you're going to do, if you're going to do anything at all, how deep are you going to go, and what does that mean? It's a lot of research. I know, as a blind person, I can tell you reading is hard, but sometimes you have to. So once you've passed that phase and you're ready to start kind of thinking more about it, you have to look at games similar to yours and see what have other people done. A good step is just, if you know you're going to make a match 3, Google accessible match 3s, Google match 3 accessibility. If you're going to make a first-person shooter, Google accessible first-person shooters. Go to websites like Audio Gamers and the Disabled Gamers subreddit and see and use the horrible Reddit search function to try and see what people have been saying about games similar to yours or games that are inspiring yours. Talk to disabled people. There's plenty of forums where you can talk to us. There's plenty of people who do consultation, and they'll happily kind of sit down with you and lay out what your options are, lay out kind of the more difficult stuff, the more easy stuff, and kind of try to guide you. Because for most of us, this is a matter of passion. So money is sort of course, it's nice, and I like to have electricity, but for a lot of people, it's more, it's passion. So read forums, read what disabled gamers have to say, talk to disabled gamers. There's tons of ways. I've got a slide next that shows you resources. Research what kind of accessibility features exist, or if you really want to be innovative, research what doesn't exist yet, and try to see if you can make some kind of technology in your game that seems really simple, but that no one's done yet. You can also research what hasn't worked. So what companies have tried to implement that disabled gamers have said, man, that idea sounded nice in theory, but didn't actually work. If the topic of accessibility and creating kind of new features interests you, there's tons of rabbit holes on the internet that you can go down. It takes a lot of time to read and take notes, but if it's actually something that interests you, there's loads of information. A lot of us tend to keep a low profile just because we're afraid of the trolling, which sounds horrible. But I've had a lot of people ask me, for example, why don't I take part in the Twitter debates about accessibility? And the real reason is, as the Finns would say, Minä en jaksa, I can't be bothered. I'm disabled myself, and I can't deal with people on Twitter invalidating my existence as a gamer and as a person. But if you Google me, if you Google accessibility, you find me quite easily. So we do exist. We just tend to keep a low profile online because of all of the hate and because of all of the nonsense. So, why isn't this working? I'm pushing the right button. Oh, no, I'm not. No, I'm pushing the right button. There, sorry. I totally realized that I was on the wrong slide this whole time. That's what's really fun about being blind, is that oftentimes I'm just kind of guessing. But so this final slide is resources. So I highly encourage you to take a screenshot of that, or a screenshot, wow, a real life photograph, because we're in real life right now. And take a picture of that and kind of save that for your records. The first one is gameaccessibilityguidelines.com. It's an amazing resource for everything. So they break things down first by basic, intermediate, and difficult, and then within those categories, they then break things down into different classifications of disability, so motor skills, visual impairments, hearing impairments, and so on. It's very, very, very detailed and constantly updated. So I definitely recommend checking them out and just reading everything through if it's curious for you. Then there's the Able Gamers Charity, which helps provide technology for different kinds of disabled gamers who don't have access. They're a really great charity, but they also have a lot of resources and a lot of people who are happy to answer your questions and talk to you. There's also the Disabled Gamers subreddit, and everyone there is also really happy to answer your questions and talk to you as long as you are polite and there to be constructive and learn and not to criticize or ridicule. So that's sort of the end for me. Does anyone have any questions, and can someone moderate those because I can't see?
Yeah, thank you very much, Felicia.
Thank you.
Maybe some applause. We have some time for questions.
Thanks for the talk. In your experience, what's been the best game for you personally in terms of accessibility?
That is a really impossible question to answer, because up until a couple of years ago, I didn't think about it too much, believe it or not. I can tell you a recent experience of a thing that made me happy, and that was I've been a lifelong Pokemon fan. And I was finally, for the first time ever, able to play a Pokemon game at launch because of the Nintendo Switch. Because in the past, Pokemon had only ever been able to be played on Game Boy and then 3DS, which screens were always too small for me. So because of the Nintendo Switch and being able to play that on a monitor that's suitable for me, in a setup that's suitable for me, I was finally able to play Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu at launch. And I actually beat the game. It's the first Pokemon game I've ever beaten without having to use an emulator or a whole bunch of workarounds just to feel like I was part of the community. I was able to play almost normally. Now, I shouldn't say that Pokemon Let's Go was great for accessibility in the sense that everyone is happy. There's some blind people who are upset because in the Game Boy games, if you walked into a place where you couldn't walk, the game made a noise, like this bump sound, and they got rid of that bump sound. So now you can't actually know if you're going where you can't go or not because there's no sound. And I know that a lot of people on Disabled Gamers subreddit were really upset about that. Nintendo, actually, in general, has been really slow with accessibility. I think Microsoft has kind of led the way, but Nintendo has a long way to go, and I'm saying that as a Nintendo fangirl. So.
Thanks. Some more questions? Okay, then I have a question.
Sure.
What do you think, how commercially viable is it for indie developers, for example, to think about accessibility?
It depends on how it depends on how much they want to do. So something like subtitles and being able to customize subtitle size, or I'll give you an example. If you have a game, like a narrative game that's heavy on reading, just being able to adjust the text size for someone like me is huge. Just being able to make the text inside the text bubble bigger, being able to change the color scheme of the text bubbles, just these little kind of things go a very long way. Not everything has to be one-handed controllers and these massive overhauls. Some tiny little things. And that's why I love the Game Accessibility Guidelines website, because the basics section is exactly that. It's basic stuff. It's stuff that doesn't take a lot of effort. Colorblind mode is another one. Colorblind mode, I think it was something like 16% of all males in the UK are colorblind. And Candy Crush Saga used to be a game with differentiated shapes, but now it's just differentiated colors. Or at one point, it was just differentiated colors. And when they made that switch, they lost a bunch of revenue because suddenly all their colorblind player base couldn't play them anymore. And Unity now, for example, if I've understood correctly, has like a built-in colorblind adjustment thing. So like it's these little things. I think it's very viable. Of course, an indie studio might not have the resources to make some massive overhaul, but I think it's viable for everyone to at least try small things and research what is possible.
So basically, only some cheap, tiny adjustments can already bring much more players into your game.
Really simple stuff. It's just a matter of researching it and thinking about it. And oftentimes, the myth comes from the fact that people don't think about it until they have a product that's kind of ready to soft launch or ready to go forward more. It has to be thought about in the beginning. You have to think about it in the very beginning process of your game. Do we want to be accessible? And even then, some things are able to be added later on if they're small. You just have to, again, do the research.
Okay, thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you.